this presentation. I'll do my very best to be brief. The IICC, I'm the volunteer director of the IICC, and we represent people living inside Michigan's wind districts. I took the day off work so that I could be here with you today. I'd first like to respond to a couple of thoughts that the lady expressed just previously to me, the nice lady from AWEA. And from the earlier group. One of the comments they made that's not addressed directly in my testimony is that wind is an effective fuel hedge for gas fuel. Wind energy contracts, unsubsidized in Michigan, would have to somehow reach $35 per megawatt hour or less to begin to be an effective fuel price hedge for natural gas. Unsubsidized wind in Michigan right now is $80 a megawatt hour, $50 with the federal production tax credit, which is phasing out. At no point does Michigan's wind contracts ever serve to be a fuel hedge. We have a way to hedge fuel prices. It's called the futures market. Secondly, if we want to protect our ratepayers from the volatility of the gas futures market, nuclear and coal are far more price stable. And wind is scheduled to jump up significantly in cost as the PTC expires. Finally, we've remained pretty flat with our wind costs in the last few years in the state of Michigan. I'll show this in a slide in a minute, but Michigan is not cost competitive with wind at all compared to Iowa. Michigan's wind contracts right now are about $50 a megawatt hour. The National Renewable Energy Lab is reporting that Iowa wind is down here $20 a megawatt hour. So we're roughly 2 to 2.5 times the price for wind here in the state of Michigan. So there's some serious issues here. And I was glad to hear Senator Horn bring up the point, and I will skip over it in my slides. Wind is not a capacity resource. There's a huge difference between capacity factor, which means how often a generator will produce energy over its rated capacity, and capacity value, which is how often is it there at times of peak demand in July and August. Wind in Michigan has a 30 to 40% capacity factor, but that's not the same type of capacity factor as a natural gas plant with a 30 or 40% capacity factor. A natural gas plant with that type of capacity factor, it could run at 100%, but market conditions are not signaling it to operate that often. Wind has a capacity factor because it's fuel constrained. It cannot produce more energy because its fuel source is intermittent. So if we took the wind industry's definition of capacity factor, how often does fuel show up that we can do something useful, and apply it to coal, gas, and nuclear, they would all have essentially 100% capacity factor. It's not a fair apples-to-apples comparison. And in fact, I'm just going to extemporize at the moment here rather than go through these slides. If my soul is correct, and I know they were here last week, I think, saying that we have maybe a 2 gigawatt capacity shortfall in the state of Michigan, we have, whether that's true or not, we have a choice. If we're going to build capacity here, if that's a decision that the state makes, we have a choice, essentially a choice of gas or gas plus wind. That's our only real choice. Though there is another option. Exelon, who some folks may be in the room from Exelon, continues to talk about retiring nuclear capacity in Illinois due to low demand. Well, if we can do a power purchase agreement offer or construct transmission for wind in the thumb, and there's excess wholesale capacity out there, I don't want to get into the choice argument whatsoever, but the cheapest source of energy is always from existing plants. We know that wind costs about 4 times the cost of energy from existing plants. So we want to look at that, but the point is, we can build a gas plant and replace 1,000 megawatts of gas and replace 1,000 megawatts of retired coal capacity. The utilities will be compensated in a normal fashion for that capital investment, and a part of their rate, and I'm not an expert on how the rates are structured, but a part of that rate of recovery is based upon their units of energy sold. Because wind has a parasitic relationship with gas-fired generators, it robs those units of energy, those units of sale from those gas plants the more wind increases. As a result, the cost of recovery of that capital expense for those gas plants will have to rise over time. Secondly, the 30%, and I know this is a goal, and I very much appreciate what is in this bill, that it's a goal and not a mandate, and I see a lot of clever language in there that It makes it pretty clear we're not trying to give wind necessarily a preferential access to our ratepayers unless they can meet certain criteria, particularly market forces. Try not to lose my train of thought here. I woke up at 3:30 this morning. You guys get me all excited. Because wind's capacity factor is about 30%, and we were trying to reach a 30% goal of renewables, sometimes those wind turbines will run at near 100% capacity in the state. When that happens, every other dispatchable generator in the state would have to go down to zero, except nuclear can't do that, and our coal plants reach an emissions limit when they're turned down about so far. So there's a lot of structural reasons we can't ever really generate that much inside the boundaries of our state. And we have to replace a lot of these dispatchable plants with gas. The higher the percentage of wind that arrives inside our state, the more gas that has to be built along with it. As a result, our exposure to the gas market increases as the increase in wind, as wind increases. So you can't double, triple, or quadruple your exposure to the gas market while at the same time claiming to hedge price because you have these wind contracts. That defies logic. So I'm going to try and be really quick here and skip through a couple things that I think are very important. I visited with a number of you personally on these things, so I feel like we don't have to go into them in great detail. I understand. To give you one quick example of what we're talking about, and then I want to talk about community acceptance of wind, because the lady from OEA said that wind is very popular. Obviously, I beg to differ. Here's a quick example of capacity factor versus capacity value. Here's the Fermi 2 nuclear plant in Newport, a little over 1,000 megawatts of capacity. If you wanted to replace this plant with wind generators, on a capacity factor basis, not capacity value, you would have to build two 1.8 megawatt wind turbines in every square mile from Toledo to Detroit to Ann Arbor. But because of its low capacity value, you still have to build 1,000 megawatts of gas turbines to meet those capacity needs. But this gas plant will last 40, 50, 60 years, but those turbines will have to be rebuilt every 20, which is why regulated entities might very much love the combination of wind plus gas, because they get to double dip the ratepayers on those capital recovery costs. To build wind and gas is to say ratepayers, we're so worried about capacity costs that you should push 2 shopping carts down the aisle when only 1 would suffice. Perversely, if wind forces gas turbines to work in combustion turbine mode rather than compound or combined cycle mode, the emissions from a wind-gas pairing are actually higher in that mode than a combined cycle plant working in steady state. And this chart is in here. You can find it in my massive handout that I gave you. MISO did an analysis on the clean power plant and showed that wind reduces CO2 under this clean power plant at $237 a ton. Combined cycle gas turbine plants will reduce CO2 for $38 a ton. Energy efficiency is at $70 a ton. Again, combined cycle, $38 a ton. That's MISO. And here's the map that I like to show that shows that Michigan wind is not competitive at all. You can see Michigan's best wind is Iowa's worst wind. So the turbines that we construct here, every one we construct here would produce roughly twice as much energy in Iowa as it does here for a much lower cost. I'm going to skip this stuff. Now, here's the part that nobody talks about. I've been to enough hearings to see the shining scrubbed faces of the wind industry as they come and put on their best face as they beg for preferential access to our ratepayers' pockets. An activist can get away with saying these things, right? But Michigan townships and counties are saying no to wind in a very loud voice. The circles with the slash through them are counties that have written zoning regulations that have outright said no. Emmett County and Mackinac City only took 2 turbines until they adopted a noise limit that said never again. Mason County, 56 turbines was enough for them. You all saw the litigation and so forth the consumers was involved with. Schoolcraft County looked at Delta County, where Heritage wanted to jump across the county line and keep building. They saw what the 14 turbines were doing in Delta County and said enough is enough. They adopted, I think, a 3,900-foot setback. Heritage is suing them. Michigan wind development occurs primarily in unzoned townships subject to county zoning, or in self-zoned townships with a preponderance of wind leaseholders on local trustee boards and planning commissions. So when you see wind in Huron County and Gratiot County, it's either that the locals didn't have a direct say in their zoning, or their local zoning board members and or trustees have wind leases. In Tuscola County, Akron or Fairgrove, 9 out of 13 elected and appointed officials have wind leases. When you appeal to the Attorney General for relief on the conflict of interest, you get a busy signal. Nothing happens. If you got 20 or 30,000, you can afford to bring suit. As always, we have all the civil rights we can afford to defend in court. 100% of Michigan townships that have had a vote on wind permissive zoning have said no since 2009. When a given township gets a chance to vote on wind, they never have said yes once. Dissent is growing. The land use battles are ugly. Conflict of interest, referendum, recall, litigation, relationships damaged, civil disobedience, and now it's come down to physical altercations with fistfights in Argyle and trustees being pushed to the ground in the Garden Peninsula. They dismiss our opposition as NIMBYism, but let's be clear, the energy blight is real. The wind industry would have you to believe that you hardly notice these devices are there. The most divisive issue is wind development secret subsidy, trespass zoning. I won't belabor this, but this is a map of an Exelon project in Sanilac County. The green parcels have a wind lease, the gray parcels do not. Those setback distances are set by local zoning. As you can see, this fellow with the gray farm in the middle, more than 50% of his farm has been donated to his neighbor's tenant to be used as a nuisance and safety easement. That's the secret subsidy the wind industry depends upon. That's why people are up in arms. Their amenity of home and private property is being donated to the neighboring farmer's tenant against their will. That's called trespass zoning. I know of no other land use that engenders as much division and hatred as wind development. I got started in this as a planning commissioner in Lenawee County.